Good evening, everybody. This is Ian,
Hey, it's Paul.
and we're here for episode 5 of the Surviving Central City podcast.
Heck yeah.
So today we're going to talk about, how do you get into the field? What do you do once you're in the field? How do you get better at your job? Which we're Googling. We're trying to figure that out right now. It's like back when I used to play on the internet. It's like learn to play. That's what I feel like learn to work constantly.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So anything good going on with you?
Yeah, I mean it's been I've been busy work wise. Been doing a lot of work in our EOC, not from a physical standpoint, but doing a lot of work in training and getting some new folks kind of up to speed on how to work the way we do business in Fairfax County in the Emergency Operations Center.
So you're like submitting them, like they're submitting to the lobotomy.
Yeah. We got to
them?
reprogram everything, and
whatever you learned, forget about
forget it. It's all new now.
Yeah.
It's like maybe we'll talk about this a little bit in a bit. It's you have a certain base knowledge, and then there's definitely some unique things about everywhere you go and how they do business and the tools they use, and so we have to do a lot of training on all those tools. And so we've been doing that and doing a lot of work. I've been focusing a lot lately on, I feel like damage assessment has been the kind of the topic du jour for us in the field. But other than that, it was just, getting the kids ready for Halloween adventures and doing all that.
I got a story. This is unbelievable. Okay.
You're excited.
So yeah, dude, my daughters don't plan anything. Yeah. Like they know Christmas is coming on the 24th. They're like, will you take me shopping for mom for a gift? That type of stuff. So, as always, they didn't plan for Halloween. So I think my wife had like a pilgrim outfit from doing, she was a school teacher.
Yeah.
So she had like a pilgrim outfit that my daughter decided to wear for Halloween, but she was a witch. And we were like, you don't look like a witch. So she had her sister write witch on her cheek with like eyeliner.
Smart.
Yeah. So then my wife wrote unicorn on my head, and I was just like walking around the house like I'm a unicorn because it was like the most absurd thing ever. So we said, why don't you like put some black around your eyes and
right.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. But she was literally going to go out of the house in a pilgrim outfit that said witch. That was it. So, I forgot to tell you that was last night's adventure. So she ended up looking pretty good. But it was a show.
That's funny.
So.
Yeah, no, that's funny. That's good. It's good. But yeah, other than that, what about you? Any other stories or anything work related you're working on?
Yeah, there's some stuff that I did years ago that's resurfacing now because of Hurricane Ian. A lot of the stuff that and I'm sure I've told multiple people this, is like I do a lot of work and then it kind of sits. And in this case, Hurricane Ian got the iron hot again.
I get you.
And people are like, well, why don't we have this? And we should have a system to do this. And I was like, well, I made one like 5 years ago. Do you want to look at it now? And so there's and some of those people are listening to the podcast, but we rotate. So like my boss, who has been there for 6 months, won't be there in a year, because it's the way the uniform folks rotate.
Yeah.
So they like walk in and they don't have any context for like what happened 5 years ago.
Right.
And then, my bosses 5 years ago, 2 of them are retired, so it's just the way it goes. So some of that's resurfacing. Speaking of damage assessment, one of the big ones, windshield survey, and the system I created for that. I think that's going to pick up some more steam so that hopefully we can get that done in the next, finalized and trained out in the next couple months. So that's been a long time coming, but it's exciting. But like I said, it's being an emergency management person in a fire department or a police department or whatever.
Yeah, wherever.
If you're not working in emergency management, whatever you want to do isn't the priority.
Yeah.
And so when I got there, that was difficult for me. And then it was like, okay, so I literally have like all of these different work products that I've created over the past 10 to 12 years. And when somebody says, why don't we have this? Oh, I do right here. Like,
right.
Let's update it.
Let's go to the file.
Right. Yeah. And so that's kind of where it's at. So yeah, some good stuff with work.
Good.
Yeah. I'll just leave it at that. I could go on forever.
Yeah. So. I mean, it kind of segues into what we're going to talk about today, which is ultimately, I would say our last episode 4, if you haven't caught that one and you jumped ahead,
go catch
back.
it. Go catch it.
Go catch it.
Subscribe.
Yeah.
Hit the notification button.
Yeah, we always forget to do that. I swear we're horrible at marketing this thing. But yeah, if you have found us,
congratulations.
You're lucky now. You may have found us through one mode, and there's multiple modes you can kind of consume the podcast. And so if you found us through a podcast app, like Apple Podcasts or something like that, you can subscribe to us there, certainly, and as soon as we upload new episodes, boom, they just pop onto your phone. But if you did it that way, maybe didn't realize, we also have a YouTube channel, Surviving Central City on YouTube, and you can actually watch our pretty faces as we talk through some of these topics and not just listen to us. So there's a couple of different ways to consume it, and then there's many ways to kind of get at us on Twitter at Surviving CC, on Facebook Surviving Central City, and then you can email us survivingcentralcity@gmail.com if you ever wanted to reach out, give us some topics or ideas, or just say, hey, you're doing a great job, love the podcast,
or if you just want to say, you guys
you're,
suck,
you're idiots,
stay off the internet.
Yeah.
We're good with that too, because we're gonna do what we want.
Yes, that's true.
That's where I'm
can't stop us,
right?
So the topic of today is the field of emergency management, more specifically I would say how to get into the field of emergency management is what we're really after. And our last episode we did talk a little bit about or threw some stones, I would say, a little bit at our public safety friends in the fire department or in the police department and in our friends in academia about kind of just being not a holistic emergency manager, I guess we would say. And so which we did hear back on that, so we appreciate the feedback.
And the vast majority of people that contacted me about that are not the people we were talking about.
Sure.
We have people on our incident management team that have degrees in emergency management and work in fire or law enforcement, right. And they're very good at their jobs, but they just haven't been exposed to a ton of it short of going on deployment.
Yeah.
Going on deployment for a hurricane or earthquake or tornado or something like that.
Right.
So they're picking up that experience as they go. My target for that particular slander is that there's people who, go to college and they think that makes them, the gift from the emergency management gods to everybody around them, even though they've never actually done any of the things that they're professing. So, so those people, screw those people, but everybody else is cool. So,
yeah, you're all cool. Cool. Especially if you subscribe to this and listen. So we were going to talk a bit about, I think, starting this kind of topic about the field itself, because it's a very diverse field. And when somebody, kind of the point of this whole podcast was when somebody says, I'm an emergency manager or I work in emergency management, and their question comes often, well, what is that, or what do you do? It's a very difficult thing a lot of times to explain. And partly because the field is very diverse, and there's many emergency managers that do completely different things on a day-to-day basis, just based on kind of the industry that they're in, I would say, or what level they're working in government. And so there's this huge kind of breadth of types of emergency management programs that exist. And if you're trying to enter the field, or if you trying to make a career change and get into the field of emergency management, understanding that kind of will help, I think, you do some research to figure out where is it you really ultimately want to try to end up in the field of emergency management, and what is your best path to kind of get there. Because depending on where you're trying to go, it can be very difficult. And there are, especially in our line of work at the local level, it's a very small field. There's very few opportunities, I would say, available to even just pursue in local level government, local government level emergency management. So we'll start there. We kind of talked about this a little bit in previous podcasts about the tiered approach to emergency management, and the kind of every emergency is a local emergency, starts and ends locally, but you can reach up for assistance at the state, and then states can reach up to the feds. And so there is those three levels of governmental emergency management. Your local emergency management office, which is usually in a county, a city, a town, whatever kind of small jurisdiction that your state divides you up into, has some sort of at least representation of emergency management, whether that's a very small program, one person, a part-timer, another
other duties as assigned.
Yeah. right. Or it's a larger program. In some cases, if you have a large jurisdiction, it may be larger. Fairfax County has, our office is around 20, 21 folks that work in just the emergency management office. And so it's a little larger than most, I would say, in the state of Virginia. And then you have state level emergency management, usually reporting to or affiliated with the governor's office. Your focus is statewide, obviously. And so you're kind of working with and partnering with the local level emergency management offices all across your state. But your focus is certainly more of a statewide, state level emergency management program. And so there's a lot more. It's a higher level view of emergency management across an entire state. And then the federal level, right? There's federal emergency management, obviously in FEMA. they're maybe not so obviously in FEMA, and then there's lots of other kind of federal agencies that have an emergency management arm or program within their office. And I pointed to Department of Energy is a big one, which I know you have dabbled in a little bit before. But there are many out there in the federal world that have emergency management programs. So, and that's just those three tiers of government in the space of emergency management. There is, and we'll get, I think, further down in the weeds in the local level, especially as to how that kind of expands out even past just the emergency management office role. But there's also private sector emergency management, which is a huge aspect of our field. And there's a huge component of emergency management in the private sector in both contracting, in the contracting world, in which you have folks that you can bring in to write a plan for you or to conduct an exercise.
They get paid by the word, do it yourself.
Yeah, it's very expensive usually. And so you can do it that way. Or if you don't have the people, maybe you do it that way. There's private sector emergency management that does things like response that get brought in to help with response and recovery, or in recovery too, especially in large scale disasters. Like, and I'm sure down in Florida with Hurricane Ian, there's private companies running around that are doing work in managing a staging area maybe, or working through a debris management plan.
You're going to want to move on from that example as quickly as possible.
Yeah. So there's that, and you can see how Ian feels about that. And then there is volunteering. There's volunteer organizations, nonprofit organizations that do this work. Team Rubicon is one I like to bring up in this kind of arena, which is Red Cross is another big one. You probably have heard about these organizations before in the news or something like that, or in their response to some large disaster. And then there is, further down the we call NGO or non-governmental organization wheelhouse, there is public utilities that also often have emergency management arms or programs, like your water organization, your water company, your gas company, your power companies. Like, they usually have some sort of emergency management arm to them as well.
Yeah, box stores, Target,
large companies. Yeah, Amazon.
Lowe's,
Amazon's a big one. They have a lot. And that kind of gets into another area that we relate to emergency management and business continuity, or continuity itself in we call COOP a lot of times in its abbreviated form, which relates a lot to the field of emergency management, but it is kind of its own thing, which really revolves around, how would you work through, or how would your organization survive losing certain functions,
personnel, facilities, equipment.
Right.
There has to be redundancies for everything to make sure there's no loss of customer service.
Exactly.
Whether it's a government or Amazon, same thing.
Yeah.
Amazon's on our ship list right now, because we both have packages that said they got delivered and they aren't here.
They're not here. What the heck, Amazon?
So,
you can tell Christmas time is coming near, because it's starting to affect their ability to deliver packages already. So yeah, that stinks. But yeah, a lot of small companies are very, the mom and pop type shops are very susceptible to failing or not surviving through a disaster because of really a lack of, a lot of times, resources, which could potentially be mitigated to some degree with a continuity plan of some sort, which we promote quite a bit in our local field. And so you have all these kind of, and then the military. I failed to mention the military. I meant to mention that too. You have a lot of components within the military, all branches, that have an emergency management type program in them, for different purposes, but they do have a lot of, maybe more around, and in the private sector too, you'll see employee safety kind of rolled up into this, facility security, things like that kind of relate to it as well, and are tied into it to some level. But all of them kind of have their foundational knowledge and skill sets in the same arena of emergency management. So it's a large field. A lot of people don't, I don't think, realize just how large the field can be. There's a lot of different components or positions that get pulled into or labeled emergency management overall as a profession that that are in any of these different organizations that I just mentioned. So it's a very large component or large field that's out there that exists today.
Yeah. So in addition to the the multiple levels and entities that you talked about with emergency management, one of the other things that I think is important is you have, and I don't know if there is necessarily name, a common name for what I'm trying to say, but you have your disciplines within emergency management. So you mentioned continuity of operations.
Yep.
Typically there's planning, training and exercise, logistics may be one.
Right.
It depends on the exact role of that emergency management and what hazards they're dealing with on how they're organized. But typically like planning, training and exercise are different people with different skill sets that would work in emergency management,
right.
assuming that you have multiple
people.
and,
right.
And you're not one person trying to do it all.
Right. Otherwise you might be hiring some company to do that stuff for you.
And again, they get paid by the word. So there's these different disciplines within emergency management. I came up through started in IT and got to planning. Other people could have started in IT and gone to training and exercise or whatever.
Right.
But that's, being that I came up through planning, I look at training and exercise like, I'm good. I'll participate.
Not for you.
I'll participate, but I'm not always fond of coordinating those types of efforts. That being said, inside of each of these disciplines, you also have niches, and I think that's where you can, like, where the rubber meets the road as far as, how do you get into emergency management? Is like have a skill that people in an emergency management office want to utilize.
Yeah.
So if you're one of those people that puts like on every resume, like I'm fluent with Microsoft Office, like, you're probably not, number one, unless you're going to break out Excel and start, pivot tables and stuff, you're probably not as fluent as you think you are, but those are the type of skills, whether it's IT, the one that I harp on constantly is facilitating.
Yeah.
I started off as IT and became a planner. I went from shockingly pretty introverted and kind of minding my business and just doing what I'm asked until I realized so there's a leadership example for this, not saying that I'm any type of leader, but there's a leadership example for this where it's like the lead follower, get out of the way.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of my thing. Like and it's not because I mean to, but over the course of my career, I can look back and like, I'm just a good soldier. I'll do whatever I'm asked until the people I work for showed they're stupid.
Yeah.
And then I start getting loud and trying to. Anyways, my story is like I was doing IT and I was asked to do certain things and produce certain products and coordinate certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And over the course of time, I realized the people above me were absolutely useless. And so, and hopefully if you're watching this and you're associated with
those people,
you know exactly who I'm talking about, but absolutely useless people that they transferred in from another agency at a very high level. So to them, it was always more important to make sure everybody thought they knew what they were doing than actually learning what to do.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, they weren't planners. They weren't training and exercise. They came over as like deputy director or whatever. And so they didn't really know how to do this stuff. So I realized like, okay, well, nobody's going to listen to me if I'm doing IT because they're just going to say, do this IT thing and shut your mouth. And so I was like, okay, well, I want to become something else then so that people will listen because clearly, me sitting there, behind my desktop with caps lock on, just sending emails, clearly that's not helping my situation. I moved to become a planner, went to some classes, and again, not college education, but went to classes that were offered by various people and learned kind of the concepts of planning, and then went to a facilitation class that really kind of changed my life, honestly, about how to work a room, how to deal with people, how to encourage appropriate behavior in a meeting, how to gain the trust of a group, and so I use that stuff on a weekly basis, at least. And so that's my niche. That's the thing that if I was applying for a job, those would be the things that I'm putting on my resume, and saying like, these are the things I can do for you. Because honestly, if they don't want that, I don't want the job,
right.
Because those are the things that I've grown up and grown comfortable doing, to the point where like, if I had more skills as a hostage negotiator, I'd be comfortable in that spot, because I have yet to be, ever since I went through that training and started gaining experience, I no longer have like a fear of facilitating a room or speaking in front of a group of people or anything like that. So that's been my niche as I worked my way through, in addition to having an IT background. So there's also a twinge or an element that continues to grow of project management. So there's a lot of very, very large projects in emergency management in general, and being able to coordinate and organize and task people with that type of stuff is invaluable. It doesn't matter if you're doing training or exercise, planning, logistics. It's valuable all the way around.
Yeah, it's a very unique field, I would say, that you can really, I would say, you could teach anybody to do emergency management, like anybody. Then maybe
if they want to learn.
I was gonna say maybe they're not inclined to want to do that work, or there are some folks that probably naturally just have the ability to pick up some of the skills required, like facilitating and things like that. that would be useful in the field of emergency management, but you can be taught how to do the job of emergency management without going to college. And that is a unique thing. And I think that it's an interesting dynamic because historically, I would say when we kind of fell into the field of emergency management, most people that are in the field or were in the field at the time also had fallen into it, not intentionally. They may have, or most were doing another job. They were in public safety, most likely, whether that was in a 911 center or fire or PD, and they were either retiring or they were kind of just tired of maybe what they were doing in that role. And so they saw this opportunity in something similar in emergency management and transitioned over to that. But there was no formal education. There was no, go to college and get a degree in the field of emergency management, whether that's a bachelor's or a master's or anything. It was you ideally you transitioned over and then you took training that existed from FEMA or from a number of other organizations that taught things like incident management, and you picked up those skills through that type of development instead of going to college for it. And that's kind of the way it was. And for a long time, that's the way it's been until I would say, I don't know, 5 or 6-ish years ago, maybe a little bit more, we started to see really this development of EM degree programs in college. And then you saw a lot of, kids going through that and coming out as college graduates with a degree in emergency management, whether it was a bachelor's degree or most nowadays, I'd say it's a master's degree in emergency management. And now they're trying to find a way to get into the field of emergency management. And
they're highly educated and can't get their foot in the door. And they're running into some places, probably a lot of folks that are still from that era of I fell into this. I didn't set out to be an emergency manager. I fell into it, or I transitioned from another career to it. And I don't have that formal education that they have, but I have all these skill sets I developed over the last, 15, 20. You said you've been, 22 years? I think I'm probably around, I would say 15-ish years in the field. And taken a lot of courses. You've learned a lot of things the hard way through experience. And so you're at this point in your career without the degree in emergency management. And so that's a big transition for the career, I would say. And I talked a lot about this to a lot of kids that are, and I say kids, because we're old now. You're old.
I'm old. Yeah.
I'm in my prime.
The kids that are trying to get into the field and they don't see a path, or they don't really know where they want to end up. And I would say, going back to talking through, there's a lot of places you could find yourself or end up in the field of emergency management. And there's a lot of ways to kind of get your foot in the door, even if it isn't where you want to end up in emergency management, starting with finding your niche, finding what it is you are good at that is valuable to an emergency management program. And I don't mean your degree. And I also don't mean just, your passion for emergency management, which is good. Those are not bad things. It's just, what is it you bring to the table that is useful to a program in emergency management? And for a lot, it's something you have to develop. Like, you have to find that out. And the only way you're going to find that out is to get some experience somehow, some way. And that's a big ask. It's big, very tough. So I'm always pushing folks to try and get an internship. I think that's one really easy way to do it. And, for most, there's a lot of paid ones out there nowadays, I feel like. But for most, it's probably going to be unpaid. To get at least some exposure to, this is the field, this is what it's like, and trying to determine, if you want to end up in local emergency management, then try to get an internship in the local emergency management shop. If you're looking to get at FEMA, well, then try to get an internship that is in the federal space, or maybe, try to get an internship with FEMA, or work through, there's lots of programs that FEMA actually has to develop, students or those that are in college to then ultimately, I think, find their way into FEMA. Whether that's through their FEMA Core program, or there's a few that are kind of out there. There's, if you're state level, if you want to be in the private sector, like, where is it you're trying to end up? And I do feel like, personally, that your best kind of entry path or entryway into emergency management as a kid with a degree and no experience yet, and you're trying to figure out where you want to be, and you're trying to figure out what your niche is going to be either in the private sector, or it's going to be at a federal agency, FEMA, most likely, because of the amount of opportunities that exist. And that's where you're going to at least cut your teeth a little bit before trying to then figure out where you want to end up at the end of your maybe first 2 or 3 years just getting experience. Like, where is it you're trying to then go from there? And that's just in, I would say, the emergency management program arena. And there's a lot more to emergency management than just a traditional program. Like your position, for example, lives in the fire department, works through emergency management concepts specifically for the fire department. There is that same thing exists usually in a police department. That same thing usually exists in public works. That same thing usually exists in public health. Like there's these little niche program opportunities that exist in an area that you may not traditionally think of as emergency management if you really look around for it.
To your point, like my position when I applied for it back in however long, 10, 15, whatever years ago it was, 2012, I think is when I started the transition to fire and rescue. That was a position that I brought a skill set to. Mm-hmm. I didn't get in there because of my education, because I don't have one. So what I brought was my self-taught planning, facilitating, and then the knowledge of the fire and rescue system in the county, because I was a dispatcher for 6 years.
Right.
So, I have a more of a strategic level view. Like I've never been like a field personnel or, fireman, firewoman. I've never even been interested in it.
Right.
But I have an idea of how it all works, how it all fits together. So that was one less thing I had to be trained on.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So I came in already with some knowledge about that, brought certain things. And now the work I do, you guys in your office are much more like utility players.
Yeah.
And my focus is like a silo. It's like, this is my part of emergency management and I want to make sure it's as good as possible.
Right.
Whereas you guys have to worry about the big picture.
Yeah. It's a broader scope than in a lot of these other maybe agency or field specific arenas. It's a much more narrower,
Yeah. And so it's, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. That makes a good point. And I think the challenge is always, and I don't want to demean or devalue.
I do
an emergency management degree, even though neither one of us have one. I think there's value in, obviously, the formal education has value. But to my earlier point of, I can teach anybody really the concepts and the principles of emergency management without having the degree per se. Maybe if you're going to be in executive leadership, that's a different story. But generally speaking, if you're going to work in the Office of or Department of Emergency Management and Security in Fairfax County, I don't need you to have a degree in emergency management. It can be helpful, but you're still going to have to learn a whole lot of stuff with the degree in hand to do the job. And in my experience, at least, or what I've found is, when we hire people in Fairfax, at least in our program, the degree isn't necessarily going to be the factor that gets you the job. It's the skills that you're bringing to the table. It's the niche that you can fill for what we're looking for. And in a program the size of ours, we're usually looking for a specialty of some sort. We're not looking for an emergency manager from soup to nuts that can do everything from planning to T&E to logistics to all that stuff.
What?
Soup to nuts. You ever heard that expression before? Soup
Never
to
in
nuts.
My life.
Man, maybe that's a New York thing. I don't know. That's
okay.
Soup
Carry
to
on,
nuts.
as you were.
I didn't think that would throw you.
I'll have to Google it.
You don't have to be able to do everything in our agency because there's people that can do specific functions. And as you come into the door, you might have a very specific niche, and you can learn the other things as you need. Smaller programs, you may need to have more of a holistic view of the whole of all of emergency management. I would argue no one person can do all of those things well. You're gonna definitely sacrifice what you're gonna get out of an emergency management program when you have one person doing it, even if you're real small community. But you kind of have to sell your skills and your niche, and not necessarily just the degree. If that hopefully makes sense or resonates with folks. And I'd also say you really should do some research in the field and listen to this podcast, right? And find out what each of these components kind of are like, what they're about, what's it like to work in a local government emergency management program, or what does it entail versus working in the private sector or at a nonprofit. Because, I do find, or I feel oftentimes, people go to college, they get a degree in emergency management, and they just literally Google emergency management jobs, and they just start applying without really kind of understanding what those jobs are about or what they do, what that field is like. If it's in a public health emergency management, very different. If you work in a hospital system and you're doing emergency management for a hospital, it's a very different world potentially than working at the local government level emergency management. Or if you're working for FEMA, like it's a lot different than it is working in Fairfax County emergency management. So the foundations are the same, the principles are the same, but kind of there's a lot of specifics that are very different that you would have to learn and understand, and maybe not like. You might not like it.
Yeah. So overall, I think if you're in a position where you want to spend a gross amount of money on an education in emergency management, by all means do, because it can only help you. At the same time, nobody who gets out of even a master's degree course is going to step into emergency management and honestly be useful. The usefulness is going to come from your skills outside of your emergency management degree. So whether it's writing, technical writing, it could be like facilitation, could be IT, could be logistics, resource management. There's a bunch of different niches. So the couple of years internship, the couple of years of experience somewhere can help get you the job you want. But the pet peeve, and the reason I joke about it so often, is number one, my personal experience with college. I know way too many people who are making $100,000 a year and owe $70,000 in college loans.
Yeah.
And it's only getting worse,
Yeah.
So the experience, that degree will help you get a job where you can get experience, but focus on the experience, not the fact that you have a degree.
Right.
Because every time, like me personally, and I think you too, every single time I've been nervous and said, man, I don't, imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
I have a project or something I'm supposed to be working on. I'm like, man, maybe this one's too big for me. I don't know if I can do this, whatever.
Right.
Those are the times when you grow. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But there may be times like that in college. Maybe you have to write a paper, whatever. But when you get into a job, even if it's the job, not the end goal, but like a stepping stone, you get in that job, you volunteer for everything and get yourself in spots where you don't know if you can do it.
Right.
And that's when you're going to grow and you're going to make mistakes. And I was joking previously on one of the podcasts about like the reason I teach certain things is because I teach it as I know what not to do because I've screwed this up every single way that there is to screw it up.
Yeah.
And so I teach people based on that. And so you have those bumps in the road and realize like, this is what I'm good at. This is what I'm not good at. Here's where I can improve. When you get that, then you're ready for basically any job you want.
Then you start to understand more about the field and what you can bring to it, and that will help no matter what. That experience will help, I think, immensely, and more so than I would say the degree itself. And I don't want this to be a discouragement against getting a degree in emergency management.
I said, it's good.
It's good. We want to kind of put, I think, a more realistic approach to getting into the field of emergency management.
I had a person who worked with me a long time ago who was very much the type of person who was like, I have my degree, here's my academic credentials on this stuff. And I had a project. It was something involving GIS, which is something I've been dealing with since 2006 to some extent. GIS meaning Geographic Information Systems, mapping.
Yeah.
So I had this project to work on, and she was just her personality and I know everything about everything. She told me that she had all this experience with GIS, and I said, well, yeah, cool. What have you been doing? She's like, well, Google me, Google me, and you'll see I was on a GIS committee. And I was like, did somebody just tell me to Google them? You know what I mean? Like, but it was very much that. We were both very young in the scheme of our, in
your career,
of our careers at the time. So it was probably more of a pissing contest between, because I was good for those at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was one of those things where I had a case of the ass about people with degrees because I was learning as I went.
Yeah.
And so I was like trying my hardest and trying to learn as much as I could. And then people with degrees step in and try to tell me what I don't know.
Right.
And so I've had an admitted chip on my shoulder about that over the years. But like I said, I think in the last podcast, is every time I've looked at that degree thing, I'm like, this will never pay for itself.
Yeah.
It's just not, in my situation, it's not going to pay for itself.
Right.
And, I could go on forever. But the point is that degrees are good. The academic part of it's good. But the experience and, learning as you go and getting practical experience is what emergency management is about. So all the degrees and all the certifications in the world don't mean shit if you can't do the job.
Yeah, it does not mean that you are good at what you do. If you have a master's degree in emergency management and you are a CEM and you are a PMP and you have all these acronyms after your name, those, again, there are people I know that have all those acronyms and they know what they're doing and they're very good at their job. There are others that are chasing the certificates, that are
Right.
chasing the acronyms after the end of their name, and they've never actually practically done the work. It's like, simply stated, just do the work.
Right.
Do the work. And when you're starting out, do the work wherever you can get the work.
Right.
To figure out what you want to do, where you, because that experience will ultimately lead to you getting opportunities that you couldn't get without it, without that experience prior to it. So do the work, and the rest will kind of come. There's a lot of opportunities to take training in the field that are sponsored and free by your organization through FEMA. There's lots of opportunities where you'll learn the skills you need to do emergency management, as you go in the field. So take those for what they're worth. If you are applying for a job, and this is a pet peeve of mine, you put on your resume every single IS course you've ever taken, and it's a list of 300, I throw you away.
And that's FEMA's independent study courses, where you can go online. It's like learn at your own pace, and there's certain ones that people have to have,
should have.
So
I guess.
There's certain ones, the NIMS compliance part. There's certain ones that people have to work in emergency management or public safety, and then there's all types of other ones. And so people will I could wallpaper my wall. Seriously, my entire basement. I could wallpaper it with those certificates.
Right.
And it's just not. They're cool because it's like an overview, but it's not like some intense practical
There is
work.
value. There's value to them, and they do hold a purpose, but they are self-paced, and there is nothing to taking them and passing a test that ultimately proves you've really learned the content, or that you can still do the function that you learned about with that IS course. And so, again, a list of 100 IS courses and no experience ultimately hurts you in trying to pursue getting into the field, I would say. So kind of keep those things in mind. If you're in the field already, you've been in the field for a long time, maybe you're managing people in the field. I guess my topic would change a little bit to making sure you're giving your folks opportunities to learn, to expand what it is that they are maybe not necessarily doing in their day-to-day, to give them opportunities down the road. As a manager, you really should be, hopefully, developing your staff or your people. And in doing that, everyone wants to move up the ladder at some point in their career. No one wants to be the same thing. We joke a lot about, we both came from the IT realm, and it's very easy to be niched as you're the IT guy and you don't know anything or do anything other than IT work, which is a trap. It can be a trap, right? And you get stuck there and no one will ever see you as more than that. And so you want to give your people opportunities to kind of grow, to pursue things that they have interest in that may ultimately find a new niche that they can provide use for your agency, or maybe in some cases not your agency, with somebody else, because they may move on. But those are things that are kind of like, the burden of being a manager, right? It's not just getting the work done from your folks. It's making sure your folks are developing too. It's an important component of the career, I would say. And that probably applies to any career, but especially in the field of emergency management, where there's so many opportunities to develop your people in lots of different areas of emergency management without sending them to college.
Yeah, and the leadership part of that is, again, a pet peeve of mine because of so many bad experiences when I was very junior in this field. But the leadership part of it is, it's leadership's job to ensure that, you're developing your people and helping them get to where they want to go, even if it's not working for you.
Right.
You know what I mean? It could be that it's working for FEMA and that they're going to go there someday.
Right.
And they're going to leave, and that all that time and money you spent on training them is going to be gone. That doesn't mean you can hold them back.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And that does happen. I've seen that happen quite a bit. So I have, with the incident management team, I know you have with your office, is one of my things I'm always asking people, probably to the point where they're sick of it, is where are you trying to go?
Yeah.
Like, where is it you want to get to? Like, what's your ultimate goal here? What does that look like, so that we can make sure that whatever influence we have, we can try to exert to make sure that happens.
Yeah, definitely. And you hear that term, the good old boys, right? The good old boys club.
Yep.
It's a big time thing in the public safety arena, and it's no different in emergency management. There's definitely that culture. It has existed. It does exist still in a lot of places where, like you said, there are, maybe intentionally or unintentionally, there are folks that are trying to prevent employee growth because they kind of want to keep things status quo.
They're preserving their interests.
Their interests, yeah. And that's everywhere too, I would say. But it's definitely a thing in the public safety arena, and you certainly see it in emergency management from our experience. We've seen it, which is disheartening to some degree. And hopefully that does change. I do think one of the maybe benefits to having folks getting a degree in emergency management and then getting into the field and then having a 10 or 15-year career from now is that maybe they're more aware of that concept of and trying to prevent it or trying to work through developing their staff. Maybe it helps kind of break some of that down a little bit. I would hope that's the case, but who knows? I guess time will tell in the field. So.
Well, you work your way in and you break it yourself.
That's right. That's right.
I'm just saying, it's happened
That's right.
before.
Yeah. Never be afraid to break down a barrier, right? So we talked about a lot. I think I would say one of the other things I wanted to touch on real briefly is just making sure that you do some research and you really do kind of look into what the field is and what it entails, what the work is.
And what you want your part to be in it.
Yeah.
Because there is, for me personally, there are some jobs in emergency management that if I was asked to do them every day, I would drive off a bridge. There's just certain things that don't interest me and I think would be so painful.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just having to deal with every single day that I personally couldn't possibly do that. And I know that.
Right.
You know what I mean? Right. But if you had described it to me 20 years ago, I could have told you which ones I don't want to do. You know?
Right.
So that's the kind of the point is I start looking at these different disciplines, just even if you're just reading, you could be 18 years old right now and think in 5 years, I want to do this. Start looking at them now. Start looking at the job advertisements and going, does this sound like something I would do? Does this sound, if you find something that sounds like something you want to do, then start focusing your training towards those directions. And that's when I say the real world experience. Everybody will take a volunteer.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Everybody will take, if you were to go to either your emergency management office, which sometimes have programs for this, or Red Cross, or these different organizations, the different VOADs, volunteer organizations, you could go to any of them and say, I want to help with this. I want to get involved in emergency management. You're going to find a way to improve those different skills that you want to. Nobody usually turns down help. So get that experience, get the practical experience there. And I'm rambling again, so go ahead.
You were right. That was a good point. I would like to transition, I think, our topic to close it out for today is to talk about the field itself and a little bit about burnout and the concept of being 24/7, 365. And I don't know that I've ever talked to you about it. I think I know what you feel on this topic, but we might be different. I'm not sure.
You think I'll get angry or happy?
Both. You're always angry. It's like the Hulk.
That's my shtick, man.
Yeah. I think this one is personal too. And I, as much as I'll probably rail on some of these concepts, I fall into the trap. My wife would probably disagree with some of the things I'm saying as far as executing these. But the field itself, emergency management, this applies to mostly public safety, I would say, in general. But in emergency management in particular, there is always this concept of that it's a 24/7, 365 field job. So everything, if you work in the world of emergency management, you are basically, you are on call, or you're expected to be able to work at any given time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. There is no break, which is ridiculous, right? In concept, that makes no sense. No one can do that. It's impossible. If you tried to do it, you will burn out, and you will find quickly that you will hate emergency management in the field and anything to do with it. And I see it all the time. I still see it in the field of this. There are folks that are in the field that I respect in the field that have been in it for a long time that still have this mentality of, well, that's the job. The job is 24/7, 365. That's what this job is. And I would always argue, if you want the job to exist for people, like if you want people to work this job, that can't be true. It can't be. It simply cannot be. And we find ourselves in this field oftentimes dealing a lot with folks that do burn out. And for those that are in the field for 22 years or more, those people have realized, they may not admit it, but they realize that there is no good that comes from being 24/7, 365. And they have worked out a way to not work at 24/7, 365. In other words, leverage resources, whether that's other people, whether that is maybe other entities in local government in this case, or in your organization that can help cover the concept of 24/7, 365. Because I do agree, like the emergency could happen at any given time, and you never really know when disaster will strike potentially. And so you may be called after hours. You be called and maybe work long days. Like those things are a part of the job. But you need to be able to kind of share the burden and share the load with others. Otherwise, this field will be short for you.
Yeah, so I think there's two ends of the spectrum. I mean, on one hand, I've seen people who like, well, I want to be a planner, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday.
Right.
I don't want to work in an emergency operations center. I don't have anything to do with that. This is a 9 to 5 job for me. This is what I want. So that's bullshit. You work in emergency management.
Right.
So there comes a time when all those plans you wrote have to be used.
Yes.
And you have to be there to make sure that the plan you wrote
works.
That people understand how it works and that it's working effectively and so on and so forth. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is people working like 18 hours a day, like let's say pandemic, 18 hours a day for like 2 years.
Right.
Sometimes unnecessarily. But you may have supervisors who are like, well, this is what we do. It's a 24/7, 365 job.
Right.
Right. If there's another way to do it, then why is it a 24/7, 365 job?
Right.
And then you have the in between, and this is the one that really pisses me off the most. The one in between where you have supervisors who use that as an excuse to beat the shit out of their employees.
Yes.
So you have there is no emergency right now.
Right.
It's just day work Monday through Friday, whatever. But we all know those emergencies could happen at any moment.
Right.
And they could be only 3 or 4 days long, or it could be a freaking pandemic that goes 3 years. But they'll beat on their people and try to get them to stay after and calling them on weekends and expecting them to do certain things with the excuse that it's a 24/7, 365 job. Right. It's a 24/7, 365 job when bad shit happens.
Right. Right.
If there's no bad things happening, it should be, for the most part, for most people, a day work job.
Yes.
And it just absolutely infuriates me. I can see the faces of the people who have, in my head, who have done this in the past.
Right.
And it's unnecessary.
It is. Yes.
And, talking about burnout, that's what happens is when you beat the hell out of your people and you have unreal expectations about work-life balance for the entire year. Then when the pandemic happens, then when the large fire that goes on for 3 weeks, whatever, hurricane, any of these incidents, when these happen, then they're going, I can't do this shit.
I can't do it anymore. Yeah.
I just am not willing to do it.
Right.
I knew a person, we both knew a person who got beaten up during the pandemic because they were working nonstop, and they got to the end of it and said, I have to find a new job because I can't do that again.
Can't do it again.
It's not that they didn't like their job, but if that same pandemic was to happen again and they were asked to do the same amount of hours and the same amount of work, they don't have it in them, and they realize that their heart wouldn't be in it, and they'd slack, and the job deserves more than that.
Right.
So it's no fault of theirs.
Yeah.
It's that they were realizing, like, look, I just got to find something new because this almost killed me.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, think about the concept, like the principle of being 24/7, 365. I mean, it literally means there is no off, and that can't, like, no human can work in an environment where there is never off. I know from personal experience in some of my early days in this career where, that was kind of the culture, and that was the way things worked. And it certainly, it'll affect your health, both mentally and physically. It'll affect your life, like your personal life. I can't tell you how many people I know who will say, like, this almost ruined my marriage. This job almost killed my marriage, because literally the expectation was just so demanding and so high on that person to do the job that they couldn't do anything else. And everyone in the field probably goes through this at some point, I would think, just based on the nature of the job. And there are some, and I see it a lot, when you're young, you have very little commitments. You got your degree, right? You're ready to go. You get into the field of emergency management, and you just dive in head first, and you start working these 18, 20-hour days. You're constantly like, I can do that. I'll go there. I can do this. I can do that. I can do all of this. You're going to do it all, and you're going to do it all the time. And that will catch up with you. And that's a word of caution, I guess, from two folks that have been there and done it, that you will get caught up in that quickly in career terms, a couple years maybe, and you can't sustain that. And it will burn you out, and you'll start to, you maybe not like the job anymore, kind of resent the field or the job and the ask and the requirements that it now entails. So it's a balance, work-life balance. I would say both of us are probably still not great at work-life balance. And I apologize to my wife for that all the time. and not for lack of trying. The field is demanding, like that is the job. But there is within reason. There is a within reason there, and I think it's some of it comes from, like you were saying, supervisors using it as an excuse to beat on you. Some of it comes from a lack of investment in emergency management from those that maybe don't understand, or leadership that has really no concept of what they're doing to the people down on the lower end of their spectrum or their ladder, and that they need to just invest more. Maybe one more person in this office prevents someone from leaving or burning out or deciding this is not for them anymore. There's a lot of that to it as well, but certainly as a person, an individual working in the field, I think kind of need to make sure you're identifying some of those situations and realizing, like, hey, this is not a good one for me, or this is not a good culture here because of the concept of being on call all the time and being available all the time, is ultimately going to hurt you. So.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with everything you said. And, I'm a little bit about my story, and it's not one that I'm proud of, but, I mentioned someplace I worked previously, and that place literally put me into the hospital.
Yeah.
And it was my own fault because I had convinced myself, like I had, I almost don't even want to call them people. I had creatures that I worked for at the time who didn't care about anybody but themselves, and making sure that they maintained their fiefdom that they had created. And I was just desperate to prove myself. And I'm going to work the 18-hour days. Saturday morning, 3 a.m., I'm like creating WebEOC boards. You know what I mean? Like sitting in my sitting in my bedroom, like creating these tools for WebEOC. And I was just like, well, if I can blow them away with this, maybe they'll listen to me at all this other bullshit they're doing. And so I literally, like, every day was like 18, 19, 20 hours a day. And, it got to the point where I ended up in the hospital because there was a budget cut, and then my position was basically under threat. And like my entire world collapsed because I'd been spending all my time focusing on this, and those people were never going to recognize it.
Right.
Nothing I did would have mattered because all they were going to do was take the shit I did and go, look what I did. Right. And once I, later on I figured that out, and I got to understand, how specifically with certain generations, how the office politics works. And once I figured that out, I was able to kind of readjust and attack it from a different angle. But I burnt myself out so badly that I didn't, like I said earlier, like I moved from IT into planning because I didn't want to have anything to do with it anymore. Yeah. Because I was just done with that part of it.
Right.
I couldn't take it anymore, and I did that to myself.
Yeah.
And there's people out there right now, I know people that I watch from like a distance who are doing this. Like they are burning themselves out for the sake of their career. And I'm sure for the people I'm talking about, it will pay off.
Yeah.
It will pay off for them. But, you're making a sacrifice somewhere.
Yeah. 100%.
Whether it's your mental health, whether it's relationships, whatever. And none of this is worth that.
Right.
If there's an ability for any emergency management person to go to a disaster area and work to help people, you're putting your life on pause.
Yeah.
And anybody who loves you is on pause and is being sympathetic to that fact.
Yeah.
But, that's because you're going to help other people. The in-between, like I said, the 5 days a week, that
right.
shit, if you're like an emergency management coordinator, director is what I guess what it's called. If you're an emergency management director and you're using that whole, it's a 9-to-5 job to get your people to answer your emails at midnight, you're an asshole.
Right.
Because eventually there is going to be a disaster, and that person's not going to be working for you anymore.
Right.
And you're going to have a new person to try to train because you didn't take care of your original people. And I think that hopefully that, speaks to some of it, but we're not alone like in emergency management with this concept. I mean, every fire, every police, like all these organizations, and I'm speaking strictly about public safety, but it's pretty much across the board.
Yeah.
Everybody can't find people. Everybody's trying to train new people, and there's a generational difference. It's not a bad thing, but there's a generational difference with a lot of the younger folks are like, I don't need this shit. And they'll just go find another job.
Right.
Because a lot of them are focused a lot more on the end goal. And rather than depending on a retirement from a county, they're working on their 401k or 457 or whatever they have. And so they'll just hop from job to job to job.
Right.
And they're like, they really don't care. And like looking back, I wish I had done that,
yeah.
but I didn't. And here I am.
Yeah, you're stuck.
So I have a lot of respect for that concept, but it does create this ripple effect where there's all these jobs that are constantly open. So everybody's understaffed and the work demands keep getting higher.
Right.
For everyone. Right. So,
yeah.
Moral of the story is don't start drinking, don't start smoking, channel this energy through exercise, meditation, fruits and vegetables, whole grains, so on and so forth.
Yep. Learn facilitation and dabble and learn project management. Those two things will help you immensely in the field of emergency management. And that is something you probably don't see a lot of in any curriculum or in any IS course or anything like that. So those two things will help you immensely in pretty much everything you do, but certainly also in the field of emergency management.
And when you see those people, you're going to know who they are immediately.
Yeah.
You know, when you see somebody who knows these things, it's just, I'll just leave it at that. If you're somebody who has experience, think about people you've seen that have like impressed you or whatever. Guarantee they have some kind of background, some kind of training in those two things, because those are toolkits.
Right.
That any situation that pops up, you reach into your toolkit and slap your tool on the ground and you take over a room.
Yeah.
Basically, if you need to, you know. And so that's the type of stuff that's like super valuable and sets people apart. You can have your degree, you can have your experience, but there's certain skills, and those are the ones I focus on personally. But there are certain skills that are going to separate you from the pack.
Yeah,
that's my opinion.
That's a good way to say it. Separates you from the pack. Yeah. So with that, I would say we touched on everything we wanted to talk about today, and we'll probably, these are things that kind of weave through a lot of the topics we'll talk about. I'm sure that we'll come back to some of these things, in other episodes too. But we thought it was a good idea to kind of change pace a little bit and talk about something that wasn't really a foundational block of emergency management, but more about the field itself and getting into it in the career since our last episode. Next episode, I think we're going to get back in the horse of the foundational building blocks, and maybe dabble into NIMS.
Yeah, we were debating doing like the National Incident Management System / the Incident Command System, and it's like there's so much there. There's so much there that it's almost like it's going to have to be multi-parts, or it's going to have to be very carefully structured, which right now we don't do.
Right.
We just sit down and we have like bullets and just talk through the bullets, But that stuff is it's just difficult to try to wrap my head around what exactly that looks like is in this venue or in this format.
Yeah.
So we'll get there though. So,
we will. Yeah, we'll figure it out. And so stay tuned. And if if you've been following us through this and you're listening along, share it with your friends, share it with your peers. Try to spread the word. I'm hoping that folks that listen like it and that they want to share it with others and try to grow maybe our audience a little bit and get this out there and see what kind of impact we might have in the field. But barring that, you can also, I'll reiterate it since we suck at it. You can listen to us, any podcast app. You can find this podcast, Surviving Central City, on YouTube, Surviving Central City, Twitter and Facebook. Twitter is @SurvivingCC, and then on Facebook it's Surviving Central City. And you can always email us at survivingcentralcity@gmail.com. So until next time, stay classy, survivors, and keep on surviving.
How mad would you be if I never started recording?
No, man.